I was born in Belgium. My grandparents immigrated from Eastern Europe, from Poland and from Holland. I moved a lot. My father was a famous biotechnologist, a pioneer in gene therapy and obesity research. So we followed him. He was a postdoc at Harvard. He was a Fulbright scholar. So we lived in Boston for a while. Then we went to Belgium. Then we spent about 20 years in Paris, where I was trained at Academie Julian, which is a very famous school where people like Bonnard went, Gauguin went. I was very lucky to go to that school and learn about drawing and painting really old school with famous sculptors, famous photographers, famous painters. That school is located in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, so I hung out a lot at the Beaux-Arts of Paris. And it's in Paris that I learned the beautiful and difficult technique of oil and egg tempera. I learned it with a German expressionist painter. So while this may seem very classical, it's also very expressionistic, what I do. It was very interesting to live in Paris and study art in Paris, just because there's so much history. It goes back so far. Also, when I was doing portraits, I have a career that I really started a little bit like Alice Neal. I really painted mostly immigrants, neighbors from where I was living in Paris, mostly immigrants from Africa, from Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire. I painted mostly minority people. I thought it was just more enriching, more interesting. And so my years in Paris were very, I got to discover many cultures. It was a fascinating time. Paris is still a very cosmopolitan city, of course charged with history, but it was, for me, I think I learned an enormous amount of culture in Paris, and also a great technique also.
So now, you mostly do portraits. Did you always do portraits, or that's what really drawn you in?
After graduating from school, I first started a career in writing and illustrating children's books, and one of them was very successful and translated in 5 languages, as it was a simplification of the origins of species for children by Charles Darwin. So and I did that for about 6 years. Just when I decided to give it up, I got a huge check of royalties for children's books for this book on Darwin. But my mind was already set. I had decided to become a portrait painter after meeting an art agent who was from London and who helped me to get some portrait commissions in London. I started to travel more between Paris and London, and I started getting portrait commissions, and that's the beginning of my portrait career.
What years was that?
This was about 2003, 2004, when I really decided that I was going to become a portrait painter.
How did you come up with your own style? Because yours is different from other portrait artists. So how did you come up with that?
The thing that I think makes my portraits different from most portrait artists is that I try as much as I can to paint from life. I feel you have to capture the energy of a sitter, and that's very hard to do from a photograph. Of course, if the person is dead, then what do you do? So what I do, actually, for some of these paintings, and including the ones behind me, I actually I actually hire some real models and who look slightly like like the dead people that I'm painting, and I try to recreate the life, and that's how I'm able to bring dead people back to life, and I'm able to bring the past back to life. But a lot of times I work from life, which is harder probably, but for me it's just more interesting to actually share the space with a real person, and I'm really interested in capturing the human soul, and that's pretty rare nowadays. Most portrait artists or realist painters, they use a projector, including some of the really famous ones. They just use a projector, and then it's almost painting by numbers, you know, and I think you lose your personality when you do that. You can find 1,000 hyper-realist portrait artists that are all excellent, that the technique is fantastic, but what makes them different from each other? Where is their personal style? What happened to that?
Okay, guys, we're back. So this is one of the portraits you've done kind of recently. Why don't you share with us some of the technique you were mentioning before, who the person is, and what was the show for?
So this is a portrait of Henry Morton Flagler. It's the first contemporary portrait of Henry Flagler. It was a very challenging project. This was exhibited at the Cultural Council this winter, and now it's going to the Historical Society of Palm Beach. And next season we'll go to a very big gallery on Wharf Avenue. It's the first of a series of portraits of the founding fathers of Florida, and it was very intimidating because I was really working with very little information. All we have today is black and white photographs of these people, very poor quality black and white photographs that are in the archives of the Flagler Museum or the Historical Society. So how do you recreate a portrait of someone who's been dead for a long time, who is probably the most famous person in Florida, and so you can't miss, you really cannot fail with this, otherwise you look ridiculous, right? So how do you recreate this from, and all you have is a face also, and so how do you recreate this? So, you know, the way to do this is I actually put a casting online, and I was looking for models who slightly looked like Henry Flagler, and so I did a few sketches of people who looked a little bit like him, who looked very waspy, who had big mustache, you know, who were handsome people, and eventually I got the skin tones, you know, from that, so I completely recreated the colors on his face. And also the next thing you have to think about when you do a portrait is what kind of expression do you give to this person? Do you want to make him look tough, charismatic? You don't want to insult the family, you don't want to insult the Flagler Museum, at the same time you want to be objective. And so it's really a fine line, and you know, I think what I wanted to show is that he was a builder. He really built an empire, he built Florida, and so I think there's some strength coming out of this portrait. So it had to be a big portrait. He had to be very stable on this chair, like, and also his hand had to be, he had to have a big hand. I thought that would add to the power of this painting. So all of these things came in. I used a real person for the hands, because I had no hands to work from. So, and then the dress, actually I had the owner of Mouse and Hoffman on Wharf Avenue pause with this suit. He actually posed for me and I took pictures, and so I recreated his body wearing that suit. So it's a mix, it's a whole combination of models, of photos, And then this really old grainy photograph of Henry Flagler. And then there's also a painting that's very old of him that is, to me, is not that great. That is very disproportionate. So I was recommended by the advisor that I work with, Rick Rose, for this exhibition, to recreate the same pose also that was in that old painting that is at the Breakers Hotel and at the Flagler Museum. But that pose is really awkward, so it had to look like the pose, but it had to be right. So again, it's almost like mannerism, where I have to recreate an unlikely pose, but still make it look believable. So there was a lot of challenges with this work that I think, I didn't do too bad in the end. But
the gazing is very strong. So it looks like now from where you're standing, it's almost like he's looking at me a little bit. Now, how did you come up with where you wanted the eye to go? And it's very successful what you did, for sure.
Thank you. I think Henry Flagler was, he was a visionary. He was a real visionary. A pioneer. The frame actually has the railroad tracks in it. And it's also reminiscent of the Roman Empire with this, Roman-inspired frieze. I think I wanted to give him the gaze of a pioneer, of a visionary, somebody who has a long-term vision, which is something that is very often missing. I think a good entrepreneur is someone who has a long-term vision. I don't think you can be short-sighted and be a good entrepreneur. And I think he was really opposite of being short-sighted. He invested, from what I read, he invested half of his fortune into the Florida project, into building these railroads, hotels, you name it. I mean, he really built Florida from scratch. It was, I think before that, it was all Everglades. There was nothing else. And so, I think that the painting is a tribute to that, to his vision. This painting was exhibited at the Culture Council in the show Art Acquisitions. I think what makes it different from other portraits is that this is painted from life. I didn't use a projector for this. It's painted with pigments. It's the technique that I use is a German expressionist technique that, for example, Max Beckmann used, or Otto Dix. It's oil in tempera. I learned this with a German expressionist painter while I was living in Paris. This painting is definitely an expressionist portrait. I was inspired at the beginning of my career by the painter Lucian Freud, a British painter originally from Eastern Europe, like me, who painted from life, exclusively from life. I used pigments to paint this face, and I had a person posing for me for hours and hours and hours. He was actually the super of the building where I was living in Paris. And it's funny because I had an auctioneer come to my studio and see this painting, and he said, "Oh, well, yeah, we do a lot of Western art." But the funny story is that this guy was not American. He was actually, he was Polish, and he just liked American culture, and he just liked to dress up with a cowboy outfit. This was a very nice man. He claimed to have some kind of relationship with Pierre Bonnard, the famous French painter, Impressionist painter, because his name was Philippe Bonnard, who knows. This was a man who liked to smoke and drink. I don't know if you see this in the face. I think you see some anxiety in his face. That's what I saw. At the same time, he was a very generous man, very kind person, and he had the patience to sit for me for countless hours. I like to make use of the white of the egg tempera. I think it gives you really nice light contrasts. And I also enjoyed painting these abstract motifs on the dress. It may seem like a simplistic subject, a cowboy, but actually I didn't see it that way. I thought it was an interesting composition, light contrast, interesting to work with grays, different colored grays, including in the background where you see a slight reflection. I feel like the eyes also they're pretty watery, they're almost crying. It's kind of an interesting feeling. This is definitely not, I don't think this is really a commercial portrait. It's actually about the soul. I think it's very deep, and that's what I am interested in when I'm painting portraits. These paintings right here were part of a big solo exhibition that I had at the Lighthouse Art Center in Jupiter, Tequesta. The show was called Community Identity, and so it was a show about people, about the human soul. These paintings were done from life. They were painted in Paris, where I used to live. This one was very interesting. This young man's name was Aziz, and he was originally from Benin, a small country in Africa. And it was very cold in the studio. We had no heating, and it was in the minuses. So I was playing loud music, and we were both standing up and shaking while we were doing this portrait. And so he was standing up, and it's almost, you can almost feel it in the painting that he's kind of trembling, that he's shaking. And he was very stylish. Imagine me with a little bit of lighter skin and more hair, and this is a portrait of my mother. I look a little bit like her. This was a very interesting session. I was painting my mother, and she was very nervous when I was painting her, and we got into an argument at some point. She didn't like the way I painted her mouth, and I threw my brushes, and I said, "That's it, I'm enough of this." And then I picked up my brushes again, and eventually I think it went well in the end. It was a good portrait. She was reading a newspaper. I kind of like the way I did the hair. I think it's kind of interesting. And it's a very expressionist, very spontaneous portrait. It was done very quickly. No retouching. And very few colors also, very limited palette. But I think it was an effective portrait of a beautiful lady, in my opinion. About 6 years ago, my life changed completely. I got twin boys, and everything changed. I become suddenly a dad. I had these beautiful babies. I had a beautiful wife. It was really, it's really, the beginning of something beautiful, magical, and while I'm fully immersed in art and being an artist, it's good for me, for my balance, to also have a beautiful personal life. So I did a few portraits of my twin boys, who are fraternal twins. Sorry, and I always say two twins, but obviously they're two. They come by two. This is a portrait of my wife, who obviously is a very beautiful woman. She modeled in New York City for Ford and Wilhelmina models. There's something very magical, you know, whether it's my wife or my boys. It's almost idyllic. This painting is somewhat a nod to history. And this was done during the pandemic. And while I was seeing these waves of COVID, I decided to paint a storm, and so a storm is the background, and then you have these two little angels dressed up as sailors. It has some Russian Cyrillic characters because my boys are half Russian, half American, and they're fraternal twins, so just think about the whole symbolic there. And also there was a lot of quarantine during the pandemic. The sailors were stranded, and so there was a lot of turmoil when I painted this painting. This is probably closer to what some of my clients like. Some families from Palm Beach like something cleaner, something more angelic, something perfect. Still, I use the same technique. I use oil and extempera, and I love to play with the white. I think it's very important to keep white, to keep some light in the painting. I think I'm the opposite of a painter who likes to paint dark scenes where everything is dark. On the contrary, the more white for me, the better. The more I can use the extempera, the better. I'm mixing pigments with my water-based medium, which is oil and extempera. But I go back and forth between an oil-based medium, classical oil-based medium, and the oil and extempera medium, which is really an emulsion. It's almost like béarnaise sauce. I mean, I joke, but this is made with real eggs, and I heard that it's better if they're organic. When I learned about oil and extempera, it's kind of a joke. But so when I'm painting a portrait, whether I'm painting from life or from a picture, it still has to flow, it has to go. You cannot have such a big difference in skin tone, for example, here. So I'm going to try to correct this color here that I don't like. So I'm holding, this is a device to help create fine work, precise work, because when you're doing a portrait, 1/4 of an inch, and it looks weird, it looks wrong. So your hand cannot tremble when you're painting a face or a hand, of course. I think it's very important when you're a painter, when you're a professional painter, is to know how to mix colors and know the right dosage of, the three main colors, which is yellow, red, and blue, to create a colored gray. The challenge also when you're painting with oil and extempera is that when it dries, it looks different. It actually looks lighter when it dries than when you first apply the color. So what I do is what I'm doing now is I'm blending it with the color around it. And it's better, but it still feels too red to me.